Hello everybody, my name is Anton. Welcome to a brand new Let's Play series in Hearts of Iron for Kaiserreich. We're back. It's been a little while since we've last played Kaiserreich. We actually missed an entire update in Denmark, which we will go back and play at some point. But version 1.4 has dropped today, or yesterday by the time you're watching this video, and Russia has been updated. The long awaited Russia update is here. As we can see, we own a little bit more Central Asia. The Alash Orda kind of doesn't exist. I guess I should just call it Kazakhstan now, but they're not here anymore. They've gone the way of the dodo, and unfortunately, Transamir has also been removed. So you know, put our salutes in chat for the Vladivostok regime. Anyways, let us begin. We'll kind of get into a little bit more afterwards. So the Russian Democratic Federative Republic. Russia has suffered. The Great War saw an unstable autocracy give way to an unstable republic, before finally collapsing into a fanatical horror of the Russian Civil War. The White Army would ultimately defeat the Bolsheviks after 7 long, blood-soaked years. The new republic was mutilated, having lost a third of its population and half of their industry in the Treaty of Brest-Litov, with even more destruction caused by the Civil War. The wartime diarchy of General Lav Karlov and Admiral Alexander Kolchak gave way to a civilian government and the Constitution of 1922, which created the Russian Democratic Federative Republic. The military would maintain their pervasive influence, with Kornilov remaining the de facto most powerful man in the Republic. But still, Russia was more free and helpful than she had ever been before. What followed was a decade of liberal rule by the Constitutional Democrats, the Cadets, and the Socialist Revolutionary, the Yesers. Much was done to improve the livelihood of the common Russian, but idealism and good intentions can only carry one so far. Just as Russia was covering, the economic shock of 1925 forced Russia to grant even more economic rights to Germany in the Vilnius Agreement. And while the economy was growing, it was unstable and unequal. The Fenian conflict in 1928, a railway dispute turned into a small war in Manchuria, ended in disappointment and failure. The ultranationalist SZRS was making electoral gains, and the specter of a complete collapse of the order prompted a New Year's putsch in 1929 by General Vyacheslav Bordelev, which ended in failure, and, despite good intentions, only became another blow against Russian democracy. Terrible years of the early 1930s saw economic turmoil and political violence, culminating in the rise of Boris Viktorovich Savinkov in the 1934 election. For the last 2 years, Russian democracy has been fighting a desperate fight, like the volunteer army in the steppes of the Kaban. Rallied around Viktor Chornov and fortified in the State Council and Supreme Court, the opposition bloc has been fighting Savinkov's attempts at finalizing his dictatorship. In the shadows, General Kornilov eyes Savinkov with increased distrust and fear. But the struggle is increasingly futile. Day to day, the hydra of national populism strangles Russia tighter. I actually don't know how long this goes for, but you know, it's beginning of any new series. You know, there's going to be a lot of reading involved. As you know, that's what we're here for, right? The legacy of the White Army. We are leaving this step. We can only return if there's God's grace. But we need to light a torch, so that there is at least one bright point among the darkness that has engulfed Russia. With these words, General Alexeyev's a few hundred volunteers left Novorossiysk, led by Kornilov and Mikhail Alexeyev. Generals who had once commanded millions began their fights against the Reds with a force scarcity able to hold a single town. Fate, or at least the First Treaty of Brest-Litov, intervened. With huge swaths of Russia's former empire carved away by the Central Powers, Bolshevik power and legitimacy was weakened. Czechoslovak Legion revolted, breathing life into Siberia's white resistance, which together would liberate much of Siberia. As battle lines were drawn between Russia's white periphery and the red interior, both forces fought in an uneasy saddle of Germany. The Reds had driven back the Kaiser's armies, but the Whites found new and distasteful opportunities. The Whites lost the leadership in Lav Kornilov, Alexander Kolchak, and Boris Savinkov all declared their loyalty to the Entente. But this was a difficult fiction to uphold. France and Britain were collapsing, and the few troops that they had sent to Russian soils were mutinous. No papers were signed or speeches given, but when the right promises were made, Germany's supply trains began to roll into White stations. As the Whites coalesced, the Bolsheviks were instead stuck by disaster. The assassination of Vladimir Lenin in the hands of the left SR in August of 1918 cut the heart of the Bolshevik government. Meanwhile, White counteroffensives in 1919 succeeded in linking many of the desperate fronts, while allowing political unification under Alexander Kolchak's supreme ruler. Increasingly demoralized, starving, and best by peasant revolts, the news would be tightened around the Bolsheviks before finally closing in on the dawn of 1921, as the last Bolshevik ship steamed from Archangelisk. Victorious whites were met with the final degradation, signed a second treaty of Brest-Litov. Even victorious, Russia was left mutilated and indebted. We won, yet we still lost. On the way to a third Russia. Given the cruelty of Brest-Litov, opposition to it was fierce from the moment it was signed. The most vocal critics of the peace was Boris Savinkov, leader of the Union for the Defense of the Motherland and Freedom, or simply the SZRS. Founded by as an anti-Bolshevik resistance group in 1918, the SZRS would rejoin the SRs at the Civil War's end, for breaking off as an ultra-nationalist political party in 1924. Ferociously anti-German, the SZRS, or the Sovietniks, drew their support from peasant students and junior officers, but remained a minor party. Savinkov's fortune would soon change. The national catastrophe of the 1926 Vilnius Agreement and the war for the Eastern Chinese Railway in 1928 provided the perfect fuel for the Stalingrad and the combat squads. Took law into their own hands, attacking those with communist or German-file sympathies, driving Russia into an escalating orgy of political violence, and even an attempted uprising in the peasants of Tambov. The government crackdown led to even more unrest until it culminated in the great electoral victory of the far right, the SZRS and the arch-monarchist SOR in the 1934 election. The SZRS flaunted their hatred for democracy. To them, what so many Russian heroes fought and died for had been squandered by the traitors, liberals, and the socialists, a resentment that many veterans have come to share. The Svorniks venerates militarism, nationalism, and violence. As the Vald Zanikovs wrote, exceptional people, the Knights of Terror, are needed. People who are endued with love of Russia and the indomitable will to shape Russia, and ultimately world history. This near-messianic faith in Russia's great face, the Third Russia, is what makes any means allowed, all morals irrelevant. The Russian Republic has already been built on the millions of graves, but a few more drops of blood in the ocean. And peace and bread. Peace, no matter how humiliating its terms, still gives Russia a much-needed opportunity to rebuild. The Constitutional Assembly transitioned to the interim government, which in 1923 gave the newly declared Russian Democratic Federal Republic its first president, Alexander Gorchkov. A coalition of SRs and cadets dominated the Duma and the State Council, whose top priority was feeding the population through the controversial Razgorskaya, a highly unpopular policy of grain seizure. As the threat of famine declined, economic recovery turned instead to land reform and foreign investment. Under Minister Ivan Mikhailov, the new economic reform achieved strong early results, but poor oversight in land reform and a sudden collapse of the American economy in 1925 left Russia reeling. Faced with ballooning deficits, bankruptcies, and unemployment, Russia had little choice but to turn to Middle Europa, the German-Russian Trade and Credit Agreement, better known as the Vilnius Agreement, which signed on April 11th of 1926, after months of negotiation. Germany granted a 500 million mark loan to Russia, with options for further credit, in return for most favored nation trade status and vast concessions to German industry. Paired with the massive selling of national land and for further grain seizures, the Vilnius Agreement allowed the SR cadet government to save Russia's economy, but at a terrible price. Flush with German cash, Russia would stumble back onto her feet, as both Minister Mikhailov and his successor Pavel Bushkin had resigned. Russia's economic policy would be taken over by Nikolai Konstruktiv, with the blessing of the newly elected SR president Nikolai Avkhenchityev. He'd even trade abroad, but domestic attempts at subsidizing national industry and improving the peasantry largely failed for lack of political will and the pervasiveness of the German economic influence. Okay. So, I mean, let's see, what do we have for our research slots? We have 4 slots to begin with, which honestly is not bad at all. We don't want to take nuclear tech, go production, we would go for construction 1, and 36 I mean, maybe we want to have, like, better land forts, because, I mean, we're going to go to war with Germany at some point. Like, that's a given. But it's like, do we need that immediately? I mean, if we're going to be mostly on the offensive, maybe we like, never need it at all. Okay, so we'll just go for 1918s for weapons. It's always an easy choice. For our industry, let's go with a handful of civilian factories just a little bit further into the interior. Because, again, if Germany, you know, somehow takes the initiative in the war, which, I mean, it's not impossible, we want to make sure we don't lose our factories immediately. So we'll just, like, throw them back here for right now. I think that seems fairly okay. We are currently at 34% consumer goods, which is, you know, not great. So still at 50. This adds up to 35. We might need to unpause the game, though, first. We'll wait on that. So, tendencies of the SZRS. The Solidarist or the Idiocrats. We'll worry about that. I think that's in... Yeah, this influence thing. We'll look at that a little bit later. Can't do you. Can't do anything in here. Third Europe. There's not National Spirit and Trench Opposition. Navy, Air Force. Consolidated Security Services. Get a little more stability. An extra operative slot. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's consolidate the State Security Services. I think that seems okay. And we have a new Savinkov portrait. Look at him. Look at him go. Okay, so you got Trench Opposition. Political power minus 0.8 is horrible. German economic influence means we're giving... Okay, so that's actually where extra factors are going. We're giving them to the Germans. Very cool. Popular anger. Political power cost 0.04, negative 2% stability, negative 1% factory output. Anger level's at 2, so I'm assuming that's going to get way worse as time goes on. And military anger, presumably again, the military is going to get really mad at us for kind of giving in to Germany too much. Right now, things are currently balanced, but a little bit more towards the Solidarist. We get more stability. Political power gain goes down, but we get more stability to go this way. As opposed to less stability, but more factory output. I mean, a minus 15% stability is pretty bad. I'm not too sure. Corporatists on the rise. Government, not terror. Total subjugation of life. I think you're better. I mean, again, the only penalty is the political power gain. But we get stability off of that. And doesn't like stability... Yeah, stability gives you political power when it's high enough. So I think just going more towards the Solidarist makes more sense. But we'll see. I mean, again, people in the comments, if you want to give your suggestions for how we kind of want to play this out, I'm always open to hear it. Let's see. Infantry equipment. Handful of tanks, make some trains, some aircraft. I think we want to just pump aircraft numbers up a little bit. I think that seems reasonable. Planes are good. Planes are good. Before I actually look at this, you are no template for AA guns and medium tank. We'll find a use for that at some point. Don't worry about the planes. And all of our divisions. How many troops do we have? 94. So that's going to make a decent-sized army. We're going to throw all these on the board with Germany. I am not worried about China. I am not worried about India. I am not worried about Japan. Shouldn't ever really come up. We'll probably put like one army in Central Asia. Because I've got a feeling, presumably, we will be invading the Central Asian states at some point. Actually, how about like split you in two? Just for right now, I'll put like one of you on the border down here with Georgia. You can go on the border with Ukraine. You go on the border with Belarus. And you go on the border with the Baltic Duchy. That seems, I think, reasonable for now. Facility with unassigned scientists in Moscow. What do we have? Research speed. I mean, just a, special project speed is good. Artillery specialist. 10% more expired. Let's go with Nikolai Dukov here. And I don't think we have anything for him to do yet, but you know what? Maybe eventually we'll get a nice breakthrough. Do we see like what's actually in here? Available projects. Is it just the same stuff that's in flamethrower tanks? So it seems like it's mostly it's tones down from the base game for sure. And also, we want to look at our decisions. Okay. Dealing with unrest. Savinkov's regime may use special tactics and propaganda to sway the citizens to its side. But ruling over Russia would be impossible without genuine support, or at least passive acceptance from a large portion of society. Having 8 or more in military anger will lead to a military coup, removing President Savinkov. Having 8 or more popular anger will lead to a revolution, overthrowing President Savinkov. The result will depend on if the military anger is at 5 or above. This is only possible after 1939. Right now, they're both at 2, they're both at wary. Land reform and progress to take 429 days. We spend 100 political power to get this down by 1 point. Support the military, which is going to do the same thing for the army. Strangle of German capital. Current influence is currently at 8. So we want to basically try to wean ourselves off of German influence. Everything is so expensive, which is really, really bad when we get 0.06. It's not a place. It's not the place you want to be at. I can tell you that 100%. That's not where you want to be. But we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. 2 years ago, in June of 1934, President Boris Savinkov was elected to serve as the 5th president of the Russian Democratic Federal Republic. The election, which led to the Duma majority of the far-right coalition of the SZRS and the SOR, was a consequence of 2 decades of disappointment and instability. The last nail in the coffin of President Vyacheslav Malikov was opening negotiations with the Reichsbank over a loan meant to fund another set of land reforms as the SZRS was promising. But it meant little, as the SZRS had an endless supply of insults hurled towards the Cadet SR coalition, the German lackeys, softness on socialism, falling peasant living standards, and humiliated Russia after military adventures in the Far East. But in 1934 was resigned and fearful. A month before the elections, a member of the SZRS combat squad had shot syndicalist Venislav Volin for treason, and hundreds of left-wing activists and politicians were targeted as part of the campaign of fear, while law enforcement seemed slow and inefficient to react. The SZRS volunteers began guarding voting booths, especially in rural regions. Only SOR's campaigning was left unhindered. It even supported through tactical electoral alliances. And in this environment of fear, many old progressives were pushed to quit out of pressure and fear over their lives. Many voters did not dare to go out, fearing violence. The voter turnout was low, and it saw the end of 2 old titans, the cadets and the SRs, almost halved in their seats counts, as SZRS became the undisputed larger party. A month later, the combined votes of the SZRS and the SOR brought President Savinkov into office. Okay. Anything else? Do we have access? You know, we actually have decent access. Not with the entirety on top. We have, the French. We have, Hungary. A lot of countries in East Asia. So I'm willing to take that. Up to the Rights Delegation Council. Hey! By political power, that's the equivalent of what? Like, that's 500 days of political power gain? So I'll take it. Standoff in the State Council. The short winter day is already ending in the Great Kremlin Palace of Moscow, where debates in the upper house of the Duma, the State Council, have been going all day. The thin majority behind the chairman of the State Council, Viktor Chernov, had voted down the law on protection of the state, initiated by the Dikov government and already passed by the State Duma. Much of the legal text was already been muddled into vague rhetoric on empowering the police forces to better hunt enemies of the Republic. But the opposition bloc held firm and refused to accept it with any amendments. Chernov had decried the law as something out of a police state and not one fit for a democratic republic. Stubborn resistance by both the parliament opposition and the Supreme Court has again successfully opposed the SZRS. The free media, affiliated mainly with the SZRS, have begun to spun vitriol hatred against Chernov and his allies. A lot of criticism came from the chairman of the State Duma, Vasily Shulgin, whose widely circulated Duma speech denounced the opposition bloc as crypto-communist and sellouts of Jewish and German business interest, as usual. Well. Need 17 rubber. We'll get that from Germany's Asia. And we'll get you from the United States. Because again, we're friendly. Actually, I should not be trading with Germany's Asia. What am I doing? Okay, cancel all Germany's Asia trade. Let's trade with Siam, because again, Siam is not a hostile nation. Germany's Asia very much is. The last line. Excuse me. The two men had been discussing the situation for the best part of the evening at Chernov's home in Alexeyevsk, Moscow. Viktor Mikhailovich, lighting the 7th cigarette of the stressful evening, seemed to be losing hope. The Urkanda raid on party offices in Petrograd had led to the arrest of Kemkov and many other northern SRs. The ranks of the opposition were dwindling day by day under immense pressure from the reactionary Hydra strangling the Republic. But it only seemed like a matter of time until Savinkov would gain absolute power. While drinking with Viktor, Vladimir Ricker, the old friend and trusted party secretary, had tried to come up with a way to impeach the president. But the opposition simply did not have the numbers. Had he even suggested negotiating with the left for a general strike, even if it ended bloodily like it did in the 1934 protests, and discreetly contacted exiled General Vyacheslav Boldarev, who was living in Berlin. Even in his confines of his own home, the gramophone was playing loudly to drown out the discussion for any potential listeners. Chernov spoke briefly to the officer of Kornilov's staff, who had discreetly met with him and proposed a military coup. Or rather, informed Chernov that if Kornilov goes through with it, he expects to feel the full support of the opposition. The meeting had ended with no real agreement or trust on either side. Vladimir Nikolaevich was thoroughly opposed to the idea, but admitted that it might be the only way for the Republic to be saved at this point. Even so, it wouldn't matter if it all would happen, is simply exchanging one tyrant for another. Not that they have the luxury of choice. But I will say with that, 10 days into the video, into the campaign, I think it's going to be a good time for us to end off this episode. So if you enjoyed it, thumbs up. Not doing it, thumbs down. You want to see more, subscribe, and goodbye.